Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good morning, everyone. It's 11 o'clock. We're going to get started. Thank you all for joining us for planting native meadows. I can see from the chat room, we've got a lot of folks who are from outside of Prince William County, but also outside of Virginia. For those of you who don't know, cooperative extension exists in all 50 states. We are part of the land-grant university system. Our mission is to take unbiased research-based information and get it out to the public. And whether you're in Virginia or one of the other states, you have a local extension office, and they can be a valuable resource to you. Today's presenter is Nancy Berlin, our Natural Resources Specialist and Master Gardener Coordinator. Again, she's talking about planting native meadows. So Nancy, take it away.
Good morning. It's good to see so many people are interested in this topic. I'm pleased to be with you today. Before I start talking, I'm going to be using Latin names in this, and that may seem confusing, but common names are even more confusing. So this presentation will be posted on YouTube a few days after we're done here, and you can consult it and do some research on your own using the plants that I mentioned. I'm only showing you a few possibilities of meadow plants and options for preparing the soil. And we'll take questions at the end, and there'll also be a list of other resources that are available to you. So let's get started. Let's see here. Okay, let's define a meadow first. To a biologist, it's one thing, and to a farmer, it's another thing, and to us, it's something else entirely. To a biologist, it's a grassland where plants can grow, and you can study how the plants grow and how they set seed in the spring and what their habit is. And it's not an area that's grazed to a biologist. There's also a chance to study the fauna in a meadow. But to a farmer, meadows were traditionally grasslands that were mowed to make hay. And that hay was, of course, stored for livestock. But for our purposes, and for most people who are planting a meadow, it just means a flat, sloping, or lowland grass area that's flowers and grass, or a flower-rich grassland. And you'll see the reason for that distinction a little bit later. So there's some reasons why you want to establish a meadow, and you may be here for one of these reasons, all of these reasons, or none of these reasons, but we're going to try to scratch the itch from everybody that's here attending. You might eliminate frequent mowing. Meadows don't have to be mowed more than once, maybe twice a year, if that. I certainly wanted to eliminate mowing and reduce some turf in my landscape when my last child left home. It's a good habitat for beneficial insects and wildlife, and we'll be hitting on that repeatedly in the talk. It's a source of seeds and bedding material, nesting cover for birds. It's also a good way to steward your property. I'm sure there are a lot of people that drive by my house and see the kind of crazy meadow front yard. As many as do that, there are many that stop and it gives me talking points. It gives me a chance to share seeds, plants, and a business card maybe with my neighbors so that they can be supported if they want to establish a meadow also. It's good for stormwater, and more on that later. You don't have to use fertilizers or pesticides. For me, this is the prime topic. I'm curious and I love learning about nature. Walking around my yard every day is a way that I can learn something new. If you have poor soil or difficult growing conditions, especially if you want to grow turf and it's just not right for turf, or you've had difficulty in the past, a meadow may be a possibility for you. This is an aerial view of my property taken by my son-in-law with his drone. And that's just the front yard. The backyard has meadows too. This was about 5 years ago. And you can see I have a few shrubs in there. And there's a few patches, but there's some paths. And it's changed a lot over the years. The picture on the top left is the first year I did the meadow. I was using a seed mix that had a lot of annuals in it. and that has its pluses and minuses. You see some Sweet William and Bachelor's Button, some yarrow, some coreopsis, and that was taken in May. The bottom picture is Monarda fistulosa. That's taken in June, July time period. And the bright yellow is Heliopsis. This is a meadow at a public garden in Wayne, Pennsylvania. If you ever get a chance to go there, you can see it's got a definite color combinations. It's designed. It has the neat architectural parts. If you ever get a chance to go to Chanticleer, it's my favorite public garden. It's near Longwood, and so you could do both in one weekend. A meadow, though, is mostly grasses or sedges. That's what a natural meadow is. And they really do cut down the cost and the upkeep of a meadow and they serve an ecological benefits too. So a natural meadow is about 50 to 70% native grasses or sedges, and there's no woody vegetation. I have a couple of shrubs in my front yard that are kind of set apart, and they're native shrubs, and they give structure to the garden during the winter. So I kind of like having them there, but technically there should be no woody vegetation. A meadow has diverse plant groups or families of plants, and there's varied bloom times for flower and color, and it provides a habitat. So here's a comparison of meadow versus turf. Again, you don't have to mow or cut a meadow except annually. And that you don't even have to do it then, but it does perform better if you do. I tend to cut it by hand or with a weed whacker just once a year. It doesn't need irrigation except when you're establishing a plant, and we'll talk more on that later. It doesn't need fertilizers or pesticides, and there is some weed control needed when you're establishing it particularly, and then I monitor it. And that's whether you prepare it with herbicide or no herbicide at the beginning. Now, turf, you need to mow that weekly, and it needs irrigation. And turf is a high input crop. It does need fertilization to be thick and healthy, and we recommend through our Best Lawns program to do that in the fall annually based on a soil test. If your turf is not thick or healthy, then you may need some herbicides or pesticides. So you can see the comparison, it pales in comparison to a meadow as far as upkeep goes. So your yard, you might not think of it as being, it's just one cog in the wheel, but it's important. And if you can get your neighbors to get on board and create a meadow next door, that's all the better. When gardeners use native plants, Doug Tallamy says, they can have beautiful landscapes, and those play a vital role in protecting diversity. Now, Doug Tallamy, if you haven't read him, although I'm pretty sure most of you have, has 3 books. His first book was A Living Landscape with Richard Dark, and then Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. I think for establishing a meadow, I guess if I had to recommend one, I'd recommend that you read Bringing Nature Home. And I think it'll change the way you look at your landscape. This is a garden spider, and she's actually very colorful. So just to reiterate a few points, the importance of natural landscapes. A meadow builds topsoil. As the plants die, decay, and fall to the ground, they enrich the soil with organic matter. It helps stormwater to infiltrate. Even when you have compacted or disturbed soils, as many of our suburban lots have, the plant roots of a native plant go very deep, and they break up that compaction pretty darn well. It also sequesters carbon, and that just means that plants draw out the CO2 in the atmosphere, and then they store it. There was a research study in Norway, and they compared the amount of carbon sequestration for shrubs versus grasses versus meadows. And I think their hypothesis at first was that a shrub was going to do more for carbon sequestration, but that was not what they found out. They found out that meadow had the most carbon sequestration of the 3. I found that really interesting. Again, it provides food and shelter for wildlife. You can see in the picture there, that was taken on Saturday while I was out in the backyard, and the box turtle was laying eggs. And in a suburban area, this provides habitat for insects. We know our insects are in trouble, and that includes our pollinators, and of course, birds, small mammals, reptiles, amphibians. If you don't want any of those in your yard, you might want to rethink a meadow and just put in some small areas of native plants. Because if you build this meadow, you will have wildlife. It enhances biodiversity and strengthens the ecology nearby, and it provides beauty outside. I don't want to neglect that. My meadows and my gardens have been a tremendous asset to me during this pandemic. Just giving me peace and beauty and reminding me of what the good things are in life. You can see I have an endless supply of cut flowers for my table or for events. I've had several brides come over and get their wedding flowers from my yard too, and it's wonderful to be able to share that way. Here's a clear wing moth. It's a little fuzzy, but it's on Monarda fistulosa, which is a bee balm. And you can see he has clear wings with a brown outline. He looks like a hummingbird, and I'm sure a lot of you have already seen one of these, but you catch it out of the glimpse of your side of your eye, and you think it's a hummingbird, but it's just a beautiful moth. And so that's one of the benefits to planting a meadow. You can see a lot of interesting things come. So this is my house in 2012, right after I purchased it, and there were two large 100-foot Virginia pine trees removed. So I had a lot of area to work with. That's just one side of the front yard. And then this is it in 2020, and it's really looked like this for the last 5 years or so. And at times it will look a little scraggly. It's not going to be picture perfect. This is not a finely tuned garden. So you have to consider that if that's what you want and if that will go over in your neighborhood. Meadows, again, are good for stormwater management. I had a problem area in my yard. The picture on the left was a steep slope, and there was a downspout that was directed into it. So I rerouted the downspout a bit to keep the erosion down. And that's not a meadow per se, but you can see how the plants have done a really great job of holding that soil. This is a meadow at Wolf Trap that was planted I think it was planted in a dry stormwater pond. It provides a really beautiful example of what can be done in a large area. Now the picture on the right is what we sometimes call a hell strip, but if you want to talk in green infrastructure terms, it could be called a vegetated swale, or you could call it a mini meadow because it has some native plants in there, and they're doing a good job holding the soil, attracting pollinators and beneficial insects, and absorbing stormwater. Picture is penstemon or digitalis, beard tongue, a really wonderful native plant. There are a lot of challenges to establishing a meadow. There's a lot of bad material out there, and I've probably made every mistake in the book on mine. So I've tried to consolidate that into this presentation. There used to be a shortage of local natives, and at times I still feel like there are. We need to ask garden centers to carry straight species of native plants. And I think things are much better than they used to be. If you go to the Plant Nova Natives website, you can find a list of native plant vendors on that. They're a nonprofit that is an excellent resource. People lack persistence. It does take persistence to establish a meadow and to keep it diverse and growing well. A lot of people think that it's going to be flowers all the time, all season long, and it's not. My meadow right now is in a little bit of a lull. As I'm looking out my kitchen window right now, there's spots of color. In May, it was completely covered with color. And I think, again, in July and August, it will have a different flavor altogether. The pinks and the purples and the whites will yield to the fall colors of the coreopsis and the goldenrod and some of the other fall bloomers. So a meadow is not going to be all color all the time, and it is going to grow through changes. Here's some tips. My first tip is start small. You may want to just establish a native plant garden and keep expanding it. We can call that a pocket meadow. I know that Fairfax County Park Authorities has had a naturalist that used to talk about pocket meadows. Maybe you want to just start with a 10 by 10 area. You got to consider all the ramifications about how much work it will take, the cost, and how much time you have to put into it. So if you start small and the plants multiply, you can expand it as you have energy, time, and resources. You want to pick a sunny, visible spot, although shady spots are possible. Sunny, full sun, more than six or more hours of sunlight is a good place to start. But I do have a shady, partial sun, partial shade meadow under a walnut tree in my backyard. So that is possible. Consider an area that joins another habitat, and that creates a pathway for wildlife. At some point, you're going to remove the turf, and I'm going to show you some pictures of some alternatives for doing that. Native plants prefer poor soil, so generally you don't need to do much amending. Sometimes I'll put down some compost when I'm reseeding a certain bare area. Develop a plan ahead of time to remove weeds, grasses from the edges and within. Specifically, there are some invasive plants that are starting to creep in from a riparian area by a stream behind my house. And so I'm always on the lookout to make sure that they don't just take over. You want to order plugs, plants, or seeds, and again, more on that later, that are native to your ecoregion. They'll do the best for you. They'll perform the best. And an ecoregion is just a smaller area. Again, you can go to Plant Nova Natives and see what plants are native to the Northern Virginia area. Or if you go to a seed company, they have plant varieties that are of a certain ecoregion. There's a switchgrass that's Pennsylvania ecoregion, or there's a Virginia ryegrass. These are straight species, but they are specific to genetically to an ecoregion. And if you have deer, think about that ahead of time. Higher density planting will cost more, but it will save your back a little bit too. Be sure, again, to include grasses. This is switchgrass. This is a cultivar, Shenandoah. And I would probably pick the straight species of switchgrass, but this is a beautiful variety that's readily available in the trade. You're going to have to water plants weekly when the rainfall is insufficient. And if you pick plugs or seeds, they're going to have to be kept moist and monitored closely. Fall is usually more forgiving for planting, but who knows with this weather that we've been having what fall is going to be like. If you're seeding, consult with a reputable seed company for techniques. They are the experts, and they have taught me so much. When I've had a problem or I wanted a certain blend, they'll blend different types of seeds together for you as a specialized blend. You have to have good soil to seed contact. So sometimes they recommend mixing it with sawdust so that, and then you might need to press it down manually or with a tool to make sure the seeds are contacted on all sides by some kind of soil. A lot of seeds can be just scratched into shallow soil. You should not till. The more you till, the more you're going to bring up invasive seeds or weed seeds to the surface so that they will be competing with your baby plants. This is something I learned too late. You might want to take some of the seed and plant it in pots and water it regularly so that you can see what the plants, when they're young, look like, so that you don't end up weeding up the new plants that you've just gotten to grow. You don't need to mulch or fertilize. Don't worry about that. Make a plan for filling in if there's bare spots, like save some seed or purchase some more seed or some other ground cover plants, and think about what the next phase of your meadow will be like. What plants could you add to improve the diversity? So we're going to talk about a few getting started options. This is called solarizing, and it's using clear plastic. The key is watering the soil very deeply before the plastic goes on, and then covering it, making sure that you trap the heat in there. This is a summertime job. So if you want to think about a fall meadow or prepare a fall meadow for next spring, this might be a good option. But you're only going to leave it out in about 4 weeks in the hottest part of the summer, and it will kill most of the weed seeds. But of course, as soon as you take the plastic off, those weeds are going to come back, but at least your plants will get a running start. So this is an environmentally friendly way, particularly if you buy thick plastic and you recycle, you continue to use it maybe in other areas or trade it for a friend so that you don't have to put it in the landfill. This is a different method. It's called occultation, or cut off from view. A weed barrier that's black this time, and this is textile that farmers use, plastic woven textile, and it's a weed barrier, and you put it over a bed with winter annual weeds, say, and you can leave it over there for a couple weeks and pull it off. And again, as soon as you expose anything, it's going to kill a lot of the weed seeds, but as soon as you expose it to the air, or if you till, then you'll have to deal with weeds coming up and competing. So you'll have to monitor it. This is not a perfect system, but covering the soil and creating a dark, warm, moist environment with this method. So this is kind of the fun part. These are just a few of my, gosh, I have so many favorite flowers, but the Latin names are used here, but this is calico aster, and this is a solidago or a goldenrod. There are so many varieties of goldenrod that are a little more well-behaved than the ones at the on the side of the road. So you can, they're native species, and goldenrod does not cause fall allergies. It's the ragweed that's affecting us. So you're safe to plant it if you have allergies. This is butterfly weed and a bee balm. Again, penstemon or beard tongue. This is a monarda. This is a many-layered monarda punctata, which is another bee balm, an aster, and this is one of my favorites, veronicastrum or Culver's root, which is tall and graceful. It's blooming right now. So let's look at a few. I just had to select a few low growers, and these are in the spring. And these low-growing natives could be edge plants. They could be in the meadow early before other things start to take off. And they give you beauty. They provide for early pollinators to receive nectar, food sources. And then they'll be gone by June, or they'll be hidden by June by the rest of the plants that grow up. But columbine, pussy toes, and this is the native bleeding heart. Here's some low growers in partial sun. One of my favorites is violets, and there's violets. Sororia is the most common blue violet, and this is birdfoot violet and salve lorata. Pacra aria is a little taller plant, but its basal leaves are evergreen and it persists all winter long. So that makes a really good taking up real estate, covering the area to prevent other seeds from coming in. This is my Viola soria, my common blue violets, and this is not in the meadow area, although I have a lot of violets as a base in the meadow area, and I've seeded some common white clover in between the gaps here. But this area, I hope that by next spring will be completely covered with violets, because the clover won't come back, but the violets will multiply. And these common blue violets that a lot of people have told me are weeds in their lawn are a really important host plant for fritillary butterflies. This is a fritillary on the right. In order to have a lot of the important insects that we are depending on for pollination and also predation and parasitization, we need to keep some things that people think are weeds. Here's some low growers for full sun. Again, these are early spring, and by the time the meadow is at full bloom, these will be hidden, or you won't be able to see these any longer. Coreopsis, that's the threadleaf coreopsis, and the irises. And then these could be edge plants too. I tend not to put these in my meadow, but to put it along the edge so they have a chance to show their beauty. There's some partial sun. Geranium maculatum is a nice low grower for partial sun shady area. And again, the columbine is a jack of all trades, and it reseeds itself prolifically. So once you get it established there, I have my second batch of columbine starting to come up now. So the first seeds come up and then they die out, and then the next generation comes. So it's a pretty sturdy plant. The two Baptisias, Tinctoria and Australis, are native to the Northern Virginia area, and they are nitrogen fixers in the pea family. And so they are beautiful plants that bloom early to midsummer. Of course, the standby black-eyed Susans or brown-eyed Susans, Rebecca, and this Rebecca hirta, but there are so many Rebecchias that are out there that are available for meadow planting. And this is a butterfly weed, of course, for monarchs, a type of milkweed. Here's some taller plants that either on a trellis or they're tall in height. And I've included 3 liatrices. We tend to look at Liatris spicata, which is the bottom right picture. But there are 2 other liatrices that are native to Northern Virginia that are just so interesting looking. And so I've added them to the meadow this year. Physostegia virginiana is obedient plant, great fun to have with kids, and likes a moist area. Here's the native honeysuckle, coral honeysuckle, Lanicera sempervirens. And helianthus fills in a lot of gaps in my front meadow in full sun. For fall, these are things that are still blooming, and I've got these labeled clockwise. Some of the workhorses that I love are the top right, that's Joe Pye weed, and some let's see, and then there's the coral honeysuckle. It's still blooming by fall. Vernonia, I added about 50 plugs of Vernonia to my yard this year. I'm still searching for them to make sure they're doing okay. And of course, a goldenrod. Mountain mint, bottom left-hand corner, is a great plant and visited by a myriad of different pollinators. Here's some close-up. This for Verbena hastata. A friend gifted me that when she moved last year. And that kind of like wet area, really interesting looking plant. Here's a goldenrod in the bottom right. This is the wreath goldenrod. And it doesn't look like the other ones, does it? I think it provides a real interesting contrast. And I love how the Verbena hastata and the yellow goldenrod look together. This solidago on the top left is a bit of a thug. So I'm always monitoring its growth and making sure that it doesn't take over places, and it spreads by stolons. So it's pretty aggressive. So you might want to, pick your goldenrod carefully. The Symphenotrichum, the calico aster bottom left, is a lovely fall plant. And right when things are starting to disappear in the fall due to the cooler weather, asters are the way to go for pollinators. Here's a few for late summer, fall. Blue mistflower, Coneclinium coelestium. And this lighter leaf sage is beautiful. And it has purple basal leaves that persist all winter. And it spreads and reseeds pretty rapidly. It's a wonderful plant. And you can see there's the trademark of one of the seed companies I used. Carex, there are different sedges you can use. And the reason I'm telling you the low growers is there's various layers in any ecosystem. And I'll show you a picture later about that. So you need to figure out what is the function going to be for your meadow. Do you want to attract certain pollinators, birds? Is it a cutting garden? Do you just want it for cut flowers, aesthetics? These are the 3 stages of ladybird beetles. They were all in my front yard in the month of May. There are the adults on the upper right, and the larva, which voraciously eats aphids. And then there's the pupa in the bottom right-hand corner. So you want to do a site analysis and take your time with this. What's the soil like? Is it compacted? Is it sandy? Is it loamy? Draw a diagram of the area that you might want to use and measure the area so you can know how much seed or how many plants to purchase. Are there wildlife around? I was invaded by a family of groundhogs last year that made 3 burrows in my front yard meadow. And I have deer in the backyard. What size is realistic? And what can you really afford? What can you tend easily without killing yourself? Is it adjacent to another habitat? Or don't put a meadow on a right of way on your property, or certainly on anybody else's property. What's the sun exposure? Watch that over, several months and into the winter. Are there plants and trees present, and how might that affect things? Slope, wet, dry areas, tree roots. This is a picture of my backyard meadow in the winter. I'm watching for microclimates, places that certain things might stay cooler or hotter. In the front yard, I have some rocks, and that stays much warmer into the winter. And in the backyard, there's some low spots. So I can find the microclimate is the last place that snow melts. That's the coolest and the least sunny spot, and maybe the lowest place. So use your power of observation to really monitor the spot that you're considering. Watch after it rains in the spring for low spots. And you want to put plants that prefer wet feed into those spots, like cardinal flower in the bottom right-hand corner is a plant that likes wet feed. It likes to grow on stream banks. So your initial plant selection, I'm just being realistic here. I would advise you to pick 3 to 5 species of native plants to start. Use straight species, not a cultivar. A little bit more on that later on. Determine what your budget is, and that will determine whether you're going to be seeding or using landscape plug 50s, or whether you're going to buy plants. I would advise taking those 3 to 5 species and not putting single plants together, but plant a drift. So pollinators that are flying over can spot easily a mass of that plant that they can use successfully. And plan for nectar flow, something that blooms in the spring, summer, fall, all the way through fall. And that's kind of an ultimate goal. That's not going to, you're not going to be able to achieve that certainly with 3 to 5 species at first, but this just gives you kind of a realistic plan for planning what you're going to do. Most seed mixes that are for meadows that you'll see advertised online or in stores have a lot of annuals in them, and you'll kill yourself if you just plant those, because annuals, their one goal in life is to germinate, grow, and produce seeds and then die. And so you're going to have a lot more work if you just pick annuals. But of course, perennials are more expensive unless you use seed. So you can sow annual seeds in late fall or early spring. I sow a lot of things in the winter time, either by winter sowing, and a little bit more on that later, or I direct sow it so that the seeds have time to crack during that freeze and thaw cycle. Some seeds require that freeze and thaw to germinate properly. Perennials, of course, are more expensive, but they provide more consistent ground cover, and then they'll spread, they'll multiply over time. Annuals do allow for short-term color, and there are certain annuals that I would not do without, so I'll spread those into areas that are bare maybe. Zinnias are not a native plant, but I can't live without zinnias, so I usually throw those in any bare spots that I have. Perennials may not flower until the second year, especially if you buy plugs. All those 50 Vernonia New York ironweeds that I planted are just about 6 to 8 inches high now, and they're not going to bloom this year, but I'm ready for them to bloom next year. This is one annual that I love. I have an awful lot of it, so you might take that as a caution. It does seed very prolifically. It's the partridge bee that's on the right, the yellow flower. You can see it attracts a lot of different kinds of bee. That's a syrphid fly, that's a pollinator. Its leaves look like mimosa trees, and they fold up at night, so it's also called sensitive plant. On the left, this is the cloudless sulfur butterfly that uses it as a host plant. And I saw a lot of those, dozens of them last year for the first time ever in my yard. And here it's nectaring on a salvia, just to prove me wrong. It uses other plants too. But plant for what you want to see. So here's a comparison of seeds versus plugs. Seeds are less expensive, but they do require you to monitor for moisture. Plugs, this is the Landscape Plug 50, that's what they look like. They're easy to plant, but they dry out really quickly, so you have to monitor them. And plants are the most expensive. They give you the best coverage, and the first year native plants sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap, and you can either expand your meadow at that time, share with friends, or both. So here are the layers I was talking about. You got the blossom layer, but the layers below that are just as important. The leaves and the stems, then there's a litter layer and the soil layer, and that litter layer and the leaves and the stems and blossoms all contribute to the soil layer in subsequent seasons. Look at the roots on these native grasses. They protect the soil from erosion. They keep other invasives out by crowding them out. They protect tall perennials and help them to stand up straighter. And again, natural meadows have about 50 to 70% grasses. Here's a picture of the battlefield, and if you go there, you can see almost all of these, except for I haven't seen purple lovegrass there, Arabastis. But these are all good choices, and they're full sun. They won't flower as much in a partial sun area. But these are all native warm season grasses that would be good choices. This is a meadow at Mount Cuba Center. This is not too far from Chanticleer and Longwood too, so you could see all three of them, which I've done several times. But they do a lot of testing on nativars, And I'm going to define that for you. A nativar is a straight species of plant, but it has some genetic difference, perhaps a different color flower, different shaped leaf, different shaped flower. And they've done some tremendous research at Mount Cuba in cooperation with Doug Tallamy, testing them out, seating graduate students next to the nativar, which is slightly different than the straight species, and seeing how many visitors visit that plant, and what is the diversity of the insects that visit. Are they providing the same benefit? And for the most part, if you keep the flower color the same and you don't change the shape of the flower and you keep the leaf the same, there are some slight differences that can improve the plant's longevity without affecting how many visitors it gets. So you can go to Mount Cuba's website, or you could visit their trial gardens and see the wonderful stuff they're doing on a lot of different species. Here's two that I think are really important to know about. The two bee balms. Hummingbirds like the red flowered cultivars the best, almost to the exclusion of everything else. And just a minute ago, I'm looking out my kitchen window watching a hummingbird visit my Monarda didyma. And the cultivar that they tested was Jacob Klein. And they had a large diversity of visitors to that, insect visitors, and it was somewhat less powdery mildew resistant. As you know, bee balm gets powdery mildew on the leaves. But moths tend to prefer wider cultivars, and moths are also pollinators. So Monarda fistulosa, Claire Grace, on the right, I had that also, and it's much more powdery mildew resistant. So you can see they didn't change much about it, but they did make it resistant to disease. And that was seemingly, from their research, at no effect to the amount of pollinators. They've also done trials on Baptisia, which you could go to the website and see that. Bumblebees love Baptisia, and these are the two native Baptisia varieties, but there are several native to Virginia, but these two are native to Northern Virginia. Look at they did some trials on these Coreopsis, and I don't have these ranked, but look at how many insects use Coreopsis, and that the common name is tick seed. All these different bees. Now all of these are pollinators, and the honeybee, as you probably know, is European, but many of these are native bees, but also beetles, moths and butterflies, wasps. They're all important parts of our ecosystem that serve as pollinators, and some of them predators and some of them parasitoids. This is the tale of two coneflowers. I was suckered into buying, I went willingly, these peach coneflowers here with the fuzzy head. I really like peach. That's one of my favorite colors. So I planted those, and I didn't really do this on purpose, but I planted it next to the echinacea. And this is not actually native to Northern Virginia, the purple one, but we call it kind of a gateway plant. So that gets people interested in native plants, and it's certainly not wrong to have it in your landscape. But there were lots of visitors on that native the native to North America echinacea or coneflower, but nothing came to the pale peach ones. And I eventually pulled them out just because they get disease. And my guess is, I don't know this for a fact, but that they were sterile flowers. They had genetically changed them to make them sterile. And that may have something to do with the patent on that plant. So this is a tale of two Joe Pye weeds. And this video was taken at a master gardener's house who's subsequently moved. And this is Eutrochium maculatum. And this is the straight species of Joe Pye weed. You see the color is kind of subtle. This is Joe Pye cultivar, which was right next to it. And this is a cultivar that has slightly brighter pink flowers. And let's watch I thought that was astounding. Nothing was visiting the cultivar, but the other right next to it was covered with butterflies. They knew what they were doing. So let's look at some meadows in Prince William County. I was happy to see Dave Robeson has joined us. And this is a hoverfly on a plant, and that people call them sweat bees. They are really important pollinators, especially for your vegetables too. Here's the 95 rest stop. Prince William Wildflower Society has put in this meadow, and these are the asters in the fall. And I think that's spectacular. I would like my asters to look like that. This is also at the 95 rest stop in the fall, and this is the goldenrod. Striking with a lot of different lower, you see the layers here, just beautiful. So Nancy Veers and her crew are responsible for this wonderful planting. This is my yard. It's not quite as picturesque, not quite as orderly, but and this is Dave's house. He's a master gardener, private home in Nokesville. It was seeded in 2011 with a seed blend from a reputable seed company, and this is the 9th year. Here's one more picture of it a little bit close up. This is spiderwort and penstemon, or beard tongue. And so I think, and he mows it once a year. And I think he said there are 9 species of plants. So again, meadows are always changing. This is the way it looked like in June. I'm pretty sure about that today that you're starting to get some yellows in there. This is Winterthur's meadow, and you can see they put some paths in there. This is the one of the public gardens that I told you, and it's worth a visit. You can see a lot of native warm season grasses in there that are just beautiful. Again, this is Chanticleer, one of my favorite gardens. You should go. And you can see there's non-natives in here. There's tulips in here, but it's a really, really interesting architecture in there. So getting along with your neighbors. If you live in an HOA, these tips might help you. To put in paths, borders. I'm always editing out plants that are thugs and taking over. And I always run out to get my UPS because I don't want to scare the UPS person. He's looking at my yard thinking, how am I going to get to that front door? So I've done a few things this year, particularly as I get more deliveries to my home to make it better for them. You could add a border to make it look intentional and cared for, something like this. Oop, excuse me. Oops. Or you can put, I get arborist chips and I put in some wood chip paths. In fact, I just did this Monday so that I could take a picture of it so that you could see my front gate. Wood chip paths are an inexpensive way to and make it look a little tidier, put a few rooms in the meadow so that you can traverse it a little easier and not scare the UPS guy. So you need to know what your HOA allows. And I have some tips for you on that. Keeping the bare soil covered is important. If I see disease, I cut it out and don't compost it. A lot of my plants were laying down this week after the heavy rains, so I'll go in and do some easy pruning, finding plants that work well together. And this is stilt grass and garlic mustard on the right. Those are 2 invasives that I am always monitoring for in my meadow. Meadows are not maintenance free, although Dave Robeson's meadow that you saw in Nokesville is pretty darn close because he mows it once a year. And if you pick the right seed blend and you prepare the soil the right way, you can have a lot less maintenance than I usually do. So there are weed ordinances in Prince William County. If you're going to reforest or you're going to plant a meadow, this is what you do. As long as you've cleared it through your HOA, got to keep in mind the HOA rules, but you can contact Prince William County Neighborhood Services if you live in our county and document your plans with this information. What I'm going to grow, what areas I'm going to grow them in. I have a neighbor here that's establishing a meadow, and he went ahead and did this so that if anybody complains, you have a document with Neighborhood Services in place. But be sure you consider your property lines and your neighbors. My neighbors get a lot of vases full of flowers from me, and that helps. So let's look at winter meadows for just a few minutes. The seeds in the meadows are filled with carbohydrates and proteins, and they provide food for wildlife in the winter and winter beauty. I think there's nothing more beautiful than a meadow in winter. you can leave the seeds in the stems. This top right picture shows a stem that a native bee has laid an egg in and is packing with soil. This is a praying mantis. That's the Asian praying mantis on a stem. And this poem is here by James Van Meter. It's at Potomac Library in Woodbridge, and he talks about leaving the bones for habitat, for bedding material, for insect habitat. I went out in the wintertime, and nothing thrills me more than going out in the meadow and looking to see what's starting to poke up. There's the penstemon in the upper left-hand corner and some of the seed heads. So I love seeing signs of life in the winter. You can winter sow. You can Google that, or there's a couple Facebook groups that are very helpful. This is one of our master gardeners put out native seeds in jugs all winter, and made sure that they were watered well to start. And then now she has a lot of economical native plants to put in her landscape. But check out the Facebook groups and Google winter sowing. It's a really economical way to go. So count the cost before you decide to go with this. Are you patient? Are you willing to start small? What resources you have? You have a reasonable site to do this, and what your goals are. So it's like any other type of gardening. It requires maintenance. You can't burn without a permit, but that is a good management technique for meadows, but it's unfortunately not available to most of us. I weed whack or mow, and then you can reseed areas, and you can scout for those invasives. You can mow or not mow. You can leave a part standing for the birds. You got to be careful when to mow so that you don't disturb nesting sites. I use some hand pruners a lot to remove tall vegetation, but delay mowing until late September because of, bunnies and birds nesting. Weeding, scouting regularly. You can keep cutting weed at ground level. I have a Asian Japanese wisteria that keeps popping up in mine. If you know the shape of the immature plants and you won't weed them out, this is the sign of a great gardener. We used to think that plants that had holes in them were a bad thing, but now it's a sign that we're doing something right, that the plants can be eaten. So expect to see some damage. So start small, plan well, use more compost and less mulch if you're going to have to modify your soil at all, which you probably won't have to. You can use a ground cover layer. Remember the layers of a meadow. Thomas Rainier, a landscape designer, says, use your lawn as an area rug rather than wall-to-wall carpeting. Establish a meadow, maybe island, right in the middle of your lawn. Observe how plants behave and slow down. Smell the wildflowers. I sat for one of the first times this season in my backyard last night and thought, why don't I sit down more often and enjoy this? And there's my toad in his toad house and a garter snake. So you're going to see these guys. If you can't handle a meadow in a hard to mow area or wet area or under the shade of a tree or a health strip, consider a small meadow instead of turf. So here's some resources for you. And again, this will be posted online. Ask your garden center, though, to carry natives, and check for bee-friendly plant signs that don't have neonicotinoids with chemicals in them. These are all great sites, but you can contact our help desk. That's the same one that helped you register today, and we can answer some questions if we don't answer them today. Audubon at Home, we have a program that's not functioning right now, but we hope to get up off the ground soon. Master gardeners will visit your property and give you some advice. We're not there to judge. We're there to give you some advice on establishing a wildlife sanctuary for your yard. We're on social media, so keep in touch. We have a great Facebook page, Instagram. We have a teaching garden blog that's outstanding, Pinterest, and we have a website. So join us there. I heard today that we have 1,500 people following on Master Gardener Facebook page, so it's worth it. And this is the way I walk out of my house to my driveway every day. You can see my trash can coming there in the background. And I'm willing to entertain some questions.
Okay, Nancy, I have a lot of questions.
Uh-oh.
Two questions on any thoughts for establishing a meadow in a yard shared by dogs.
I would fence off an area that you're going to consider a meadow. I have a small dog, and he just decimates things. He walks all over things and pees on them, and I would establish an area that your dog will stay out of. I also don't want my dog, because he's small, going into my meadow because there's varmints living in there, including a groundhog with teeth, and my dog doesn't have teeth. So there's that wildlife interaction piece too.
Okay, and I have a partial shade area that I would love to establish a meadow in. Any suggestions? You did have plant lists, right, for shade and part shade?
Yeah, yeah, I do. There's some in the presentation, but go to Plant Nova Natives or the Earth Sangha website, or we can send you. We have great ones that we've been posting on social media, or we have plant lists in the office. So for different conditions.
Is there anything one can do to have a buffer against pesticides? Both my neighbors use pesticides in their yards.
Yeah, that's a tough one. If pesticides are applied properly by a licensed applicator, it should not drift onto your property, but we know that sometimes does happen. I would appeal to your neighbor and maybe not plant right up against a neighbor's yard who is using pesticides. It's a tough situation. That's my only advice.
Also, another question about creating a meadow in a shaded area with lots of big trees.
Yeah, and turf doesn't grow well there. So you might want to consider a ground cover if you don't want a meadow for shade, and we'll be doing a ground cover presentation in July. But there we can give you a plant list, or you can go to Plant Nova Natives for suggestions on plants to grow in the shade. I was surprised how well my meadow was doing in shade under my walnut tree, because sometimes walnut trees will inhibit the growth of certain things, but it's growing like gangbusters. So I'd be happy to tell you what I grow under there. Or you can email the Master Gardener Help Desk and catch me that way.
Can you please elaborate on why mulch is bad from one of the slides?
Oh, mulch in itself isn't bad. And I use mulch to define my garden, my meadow, and the paths. And then if I've found a patch of weeds and I can't get anything planted there, I'll throw a wheelbarrow load of mulch right on that area to keep it from growing, those weeds from growing back until I can get something planted there. So mulch is not bad. And if I want to protect a tree or a shrub that's on the outskirts of the meadow, I'll clear an area around that so it has room to get water and nutrients, and then I'll mulch away from the trunk, but around the drip line of that tree. So no, use judiciously. It's just that a meadow is not a garden. That's why I said that about mulch.
And some of us like to use arborist wood chips that you can often get free from arborists.
Yeah, and that's what you see in the paths that I showed you from my yard.
Is it better to plant seeds or purchase potted plants?
Well, it kind of depends on your budget. Seed and also depends on how vigilant you can be about making sure that the seeds can germinate and have enough moisture. So seeds are an economical way to go. And you saw that meadow in Nokesville that was treated with herbicide and then planted with seeds exclusively, and it's doing beautifully. So it can be done if you get the right seed mix, with perennials, native perennials. But it kind of depends on your time, how vigilant you can be, and your budget.
These slides will be offered as a PDF for printing afterwards. I think we'll place them on our Facebook pages and people can download them as a PDF, correct?
Right. Or it'll be on our YouTube channel is what is where it will be.
Yes. Isn't white, and then we have questions coming in like crazy now. Isn't white clover a perennial reseeder here, or are you planting non-native annuals? Anyone else have an explanation?
I do use white Dutch clover, which is not native. It does not reseed for me here. It pretty much acts like an annual, but I use that if I have a bare spot, I'll fill it in. It's not native, but I'm not a purist. I try to stick with straight species for the meadow plants, but if I have an area that's being invaded by stiltgrass or other invasive plants, I'd rather have clover than bare ground because it dies back. The white Dutch clover dies back, and I reseed it every year.
Nancy, can I talk about clover for just a second?
Sure.
So white clover is a perennial, and in our climate, it will be a perennial, but it needs to establish really well to survive the winter. Once it does that, it will spread fairly well. That being said, if you've got the right diversity within the soil, the natives will take over and eventually kind of crowd out some of the clover. In a lawn situation, if you're trying to balance clover and turf, you cut lower to encourage white clover, you cut higher to kind of discourage it. So as the meadow takes shape, one of the problems with white clover in a meadow is that it's just not tall enough really to get enough sunlight. There are other clovers that will do that. But
that's okay though, Thomas, right? Because then
right. Because if you're just using it temporarily, if you want it to act like an annual, your native meadow plants are going to take over eventually, and it's not going to be an issue. I just saw somebody asking about crimson clover. Crimson clover is an annual. It's an excellent pollinator attractant. There are people I know who use it. They overseed it in their meadow just to have that annual there. We're kind of at the northern limit for crimson clover. If you're thinking about using it in your yard, whether in a meadow or a garden, whatever, you want to establish it early because otherwise it won't survive the winter if we've got a quote normal winter.
Buckwheat too. I've thrown that in some areas that are bare.
And those are excellent for holding the soil and, waiting for your natives to spread and take over that area.
So don't forget to join us next Wednesday. I'm going to be talking about small native trees and shrubs for suburban landscapes. Same registration procedure, and I hope you'll come back and join us then.
We have 28 more questions.
Oh, okay.
Swallowwort strategies and other weeds to definitely eliminate. Swallowwort, and it was from Maureen.
I don't know that weed. Do you, Thomas?
No, that doesn't really sound familiar.
You can send us a picture to the Extension Horticulture.
Oh, and she's in Connecticut, so that's probably why we have not heard of that. Maureen, my best advice would be to contact your local extension office and talk to them about it because they'll have more knowledge, more regional knowledge of whether that's good and how to deal with it best.
UConn has a fantastic horticultural help desk, and they also have a master gardeners, and they answer questions very quickly in Hartford. Outside of Hartford, as you know. All right. Which solidago is a thug?
It's the straight species. Oh, and I'm trying to remember what it is. It's not. Can you email the help desk and I'll tell you? I'll have to look that one up. It's the one that's like 10 feet tall. I'll be glad to answer that question. Just email the help desk. In fact, if you guys need to get off, feel free to leave. I will stay on for about 5 more minutes and answer as many questions. And if there's any left over, just email us.
How do you get rid of powdery mildew?
You don't. I pretty much prune it out, or I pick one of those cultivars that are resistant. that are still a useful species.
What time of year is best for annual mowing? And David may have answered that.
Thanks, David. Anything else?
Many questions about garlic mustard, but I think they were answered.
Pull the roots because it's allelopathic. It sends out chemicals in its roots to keep other plants from growing along near it.
Queen Anne's lace, support or no?
You know, it's not a native plant, but it does attract some pollinators. I would pick a different plant. I would not plant that one, but it's not terrible.
The question about, is there a site in Pennsylvania like Plant Nova Natives? Yes, there are several. I belong to them, Native Plant Societies, and plus your cooperative extension at Penn State. I live in Shenandoah Valley. Do the resource you reference for native plants apply to this area? If not, can you recommend a better resource?
There is a Piedmont Native Plant Society, and they have a guide like the Plant Nova Natives. You can go online and find that guide. They have a printed copy. I don't know. I think they're just getting ready to reprint it again with new things in it.
Where can we find the clear plastic large enough for solarizing a big meadow area?
I would check like a farm, forestry supply company, something like that. Make sure it's thick, so you know it's thick enough, and then you'd be able to reuse it, recycle it.
I want to care for cavity nesting bees, so I can really struggle with them to mow or burn. Do you keep a lookout for cavity bees and then just don't mow there?
Right, that's what I do. And I got stung last week by a yellow jacket that was nesting.
I'm going to be putting in a meadow in the fall in a construction area. It is currently not cared for grass. Do I need to do additional effort to kill the grass? That will have barely survived. The grass seems to be mostly rye.
I put a note in the chat. If they're in Virginia, I'd be happy, or close to local, be happy to go and look and make a recommendation. It really depends on the grass. If it is annual rye, especially annual cereal rye, then it's just a matter of mowing it down and planting through it. But if it's perennial rye, or if it's some other type of grass, it could be a different situation.
Okay, we're gonna cut the questions off. I'm sorry, but you are free to email us, and if you email the Master Gardener desk, then it will get to Thomas or I or Robin or David if you have a question about his meadow. Okay, thank you for coming. Hope to see you next Wednesday. We have something coming up the rest of the summer, every Wednesday at 11.
If you enjoyed this video, please let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. For more information on lawns and gardens, contact the Extension Horticultural Help Desk at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.